ready. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting us to share our story. Presently, we are in our exhibit. We have an exhibit that's at Ashton Villa in the carriage house. And it was actually, I guess last year on 19th of June was the first day it opened. So we have been trying to use this exhibit to tell the story from around 1860 through Reconstruction. So one of my background was one of the screens. So thank you again for inviting me to share our story. So let's get started. This is a map of Texas in the 1800s, and it shows about half of the state occupied with plantations and homes. Galveston didn't have plantations. Galveston didn't have the soil produced cash crops. The enslaved of Galveston were domestic workers and laborers. Women were cooks, maids, nannies, cared for the family and cared for the household. Men were gardeners, chauffeurs, handymen, brick makers, other crafts. They loaded and unloaded ships and were crewmen on the ships. Okay, and Galveston is so small, you really can't see it. You could see on the map, the Gulf of Mexico, the little blue lines near the bottom there is where Galveston is located. But now we're going to take a closer look at Galveston. But here is Galveston. The star is almost larger than our little city. That little strip of land near the star that says Galveston is about 27 miles long, and at its deepest point, about 3.5 miles. We have one of the few free ferries in Galveston. We also have a 6-lane bridge that connects us to the United States. During hurricane season, the bridge is our only way off the island. The ferry is closed. Some of you who live in Houston may remember Hurricane Rita. And we had a difficult time leaving Galveston because I know that Mayor White did ask the citizen of Houston to wait some hours, maybe 12 or 24 hours to allow us to leave. But as you know, a few years before, Hurricane Katrina really destroyed Louisiana and caused a lot of problems. So I'm sure everybody was afraid. So that is Galveston. It is surrounded by water, and it's a small city with a lot of history. When did slaves arrive in Galveston? We know there were people of African heritage living in Texas as far as back as the 1500s. And over the years, many enslaved arrived with their owners as they explored Texas. However, we had a pirate, Jean Lafitte. He brought the men and women that worked with him on his ship after he left Louisiana. In fact, New Orleans really asked him to leave, but he found Galveston, he found this island before it was even founded in 1817. For a few years, the island was his place to accommodate ships, smuggling slaves. After the United States had actually passed the International Slave Trade Law in 1808, which forbade importation of slaves to the United States. However, he and one of his favorite clients were able to find a loophole in the law. And his favorite client, I would say his best client, was actually our Texas Alamo hero, James Jim Bowie. Bowie purchased slaves from Lafitte for $1 a pound and sold them at a substantial profit throughout Texas. Lafitte was forced to leave the Galveston Island in 1821 by our United States Navy. Stephen F. Austin, the father of Texas. Stephen F. Austin and his old 300. You may want to search that some other time. I won't go into detail, but I will say that Austin decided to to establish colonies here in Texas. And what he did, and actually he started this in 1822, he advertised the rich soil in Texas, selling land to enslavers in other southern states. His goal was 300 families and as many enslaved people they could bring. By 1825, Galveston was designated the major port of Texas for import and export. That also increased the number of slaves purchased. Cotton was Texas' major product. This is a notice. If you just read the top two lines, it really tells the story. The African Americans are those who are African descent for property. So this is a meeting, and this is the meeting it's all about. The mayor of Galveston, John Henry Brown, called a meeting of the island's slaveholders to discuss a newly adopted law that governed slaves and free Negroes. The new law stated that free Negroes must leave or be enslaved. Mary Madison, and this is a story of a lady who was allowed to stay. Mary Madison was one of the free Negroes, a nurse. She had established a reputation as being a valuable citizen. She had established a reputation of caring for people, caring for the community. A petition was sent to the state Congress asking if on Mary's behalf that she allowed to be free. More than 80 white Galvestonians signed the petition, which was approved, and she was allowed to stay free. Now, for some of the others, we really don't know if there were any petitions or maybe they did leave, but where did they go? Nobody knows. But there was a glimmer of light for enslaved in Galveston prior to this meeting, because African Americans founded the first Baptist church in Galveston in 1840. It's now a large brick church. It's Avenue L Baptist Church, and it's located at 2012 Avenue L. Now that was 1840. The first Methodist church for African Americans in Texas was founded in Galveston in 1848. Now Reedy Chapel, and I'll tell you a little bit about Reedy Chapel later. It's located at 2013 Broadway, RJ. It's the main street that goes through Galveston. So it played a significant role in getting the information out to the enslaved. Okay, this is the historic strand, the Wall Street of the Southwest. Many of the plantation owners had homes here in Galveston. They also had businesses on Galveston. This was the street where they set up to transact all of their business. So Galveston was a really, really wealthy city because we were the only port that could ship and receive merchandise and materials from other places. A lot of money flowed through Galveston. The building at the left front, and I don't know which side your screen is on, but if you see the little carriage that is right near that building, that's actually the Osterman building. And that was actually General Gordon's Rangers headquarters. And the building is no longer there. It is now a parking lot. But also we have a Juneteenth marker just in front of what some people say were the front door of the Osterman building. We have visitors here. So if you hear some talking, there are some of the folks who are touring. General Orders number 3. And if you look at the order, you see that it's orders, it's an S. And I'm assuming that's because there was more than one order, but it was number 3. On your right is Major General Gardner. On your left is Major Emory. Emory actually wrote the order. He was an abolitionist and didn't support slavery. So the two words that you find that are very, very important, absolute equality, he made sure those two words were there. Now, I don't know if you can read it, but the last two sentences does kind of, I guess it say, almost erase the first portion. This is what you'll see on the last part of the order. And for some people, they don't actually always post this. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either here or elsewhere. So even though the order freed the enslaved, there were some instructions that basically said that you are not going to be as free as you think you're going to be. Okay, so I think one of the questions was about whether the enslaved were compensated or any money was given to them, or whether the enslavers, prior enslavers were penalized if they didn't follow through. Well, there were actually 5 orders for Texas, and one of them stated to the slave owners that if they didn't, I won't quote the whole thing, but basically if they didn't comply, that they were going to freeze their finances. And remember, a lot of those people were very, very wealthy. There was also one that indicated that the so-called federal soldiers had to report to certain cities in Texas. They also had to lay down their arms. So there were a couple of more. So even though the enslaved or the ex-slave didn't receive anything, the ex-owners didn't receive anything either, but they were to comply. Remember, I mentioned Reed Chapel earlier. Well, one of the things that we know, and this is based on our Galveston newspaper, which I know the reporters followed the soldiers throughout Galveston. They actually reported that the order was actually read or presented 4 different places. One was Reedy Chapel, and to your left, my left, I know, it's just a sketch of the way that church looked during that time. To the right is the church today. The other place in which we were informed that the order was read or issued was at our courthouse, at the custom house, and on the Strand. The Strand probably was the first place because that's where the soldiers and General Carter actually arrived. Now, Reedy Chapel has a lot of history because first of all, it was one of the 4, even though we had Avenue L first. Reedy was a little closer to the Strand and closer to other areas, the courthouse and the custom house. So it was easier for them, I'm gonna say easier for them to get there. But let me just tell you a little bit about Reedy Chapel. It was the only site, one of the 4 sites where the order was read. And of course, I mentioned before, our paper was founded in 1845. And those of you who know reporters, they want to go to the hot places. Some people have stated that it was read in Ashton Villa. We have not found information that supports that. And one of the reasons, personally, I know that maybe it didn't happen. Mr. Brown, his name was James M. Brown, was a very wealthy, prominent man. He had the first brick home in Galveston, and it's on our main street now. It still stands and still operates. And if they were going to go anywhere in Galveston to visit a family or make an announcement, it likely would have been at Mr. Brown's house at Ashton Villa, but that didn't happen. The Avenue Reedy Chapel houses one of the 2 organs that are in the United States. It has the oldest pipe organ in Texas. The organ was built by the firm E.G.G. Hook of Boston as their opus number 647 in the year 1872. First owned by the White Trinity Church in Galveston, and Reedy Chapel purchased the organ in 1912. It still works. So, and that great thing, we want to let you know that the other one is located at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The organ still works every so often when they have a special program. They do have someone to play it at least one time. So it's a beautiful church. They still have service. There are a number of activities that are held there. So if you're in Galveston, it's only 2 streets from Ashton Villa, so you can actually see the church. They don't give tours, but they will open the church if they have small groups, a large group that would like to tour it. So this is one. It is actually located at 2201 Broadway or Avenue J. Okay, this is Ashton Villa. It was built in 1859. On the left, as it looked, I guess, back in the 1800s. And on the right is Ashton Villa today. Again, I mentioned that it was the first brick home in Galveston, owned by James E. Brown. The site of our citywide Juneteenth celebration since 1980. It said Ashton Villa, built by Alex. Alex was Mr. Brown's slave. Here is the bill of sale for Alex, a master brickmaker, Mr. Brown's slave, who built Ashton Villa. Now, he didn't build it personally, but he oversaw the making of the bricks and making a construction of it. But this is his bill of sales. And it's located at 2328 Broadway, the main street. You just drive down Broadway. We only have one main street, and that's where I-45 ends, and you come into Galveston. So you'll see that building. The fireplace on the left is also one of Alex's work. He actually left Galveston in 1865 after he received his freedom, but he returned in 1870, and he actually built this fireplace that is still at Ashton Villa in the ballroom. He returned to work for Mr. Brown, but for wages. This is the ballroom. It's an elegant room. It originally was the family's family room and the kitchen. But when the Shriners organization purchased it, they removed the kitchen, opened it up a bit, and made it a ballroom. Several years after, when they decided they wanted to sell it, a citizen of Galveston, I think they met with the city council and said that we just didn't want it, because we didn't know whether they didn't know whether they were going to demolish it or sell it. And if someone sold it, they may have renovated in a way that it would be recognizable. So the city jumped in and wrote some type of ordinance where certain buildings could not be destroyed or demolished. And if so, they had to remain as the same type of building it was when it was built. So finally, Galveston City decided that Galveston Historical Foundation could manage it. So that's what Galveston Historical Foundation did. And then later on, the city of Galveston sold the building to Galveston Historical. So we own it. And this is where our exhibit is. It's in the carriage house of Ashton Villa. Okay, some of you in Houston recognize this person. This is State Representative Al Edwards. He was actually the one who wrote the bill so that the state of Texas would have a state holiday. He wasn't around long enough to see it become a federal holiday. His statue is on the grounds of Ashton Villa. Okay, we have, I think one of the questions, how do we celebrate Juneteenth? Well, it's similar to the 4th of July. We have picnics, we have parades, we have fireworks, we have programs focusing on freedom. Since 1980, we've had a citywide celebration at Ashton Villa on June 19th. So we really celebrate almost the whole month. Our first event this year, and we've been doing it for years, is a pageant, and it was on June 4th. We've had a banquet on the 7th of June. We had a gala last night. And this weekend, there are so many things that are happening. You really would not be able to finish all of them in the weekend. But we celebrate sometimes throughout the month of June. There are still programs that are held later on in the month. So this is just a picture of one of the celebrations. In the middle is at Ashton Villa. On the left bottom, this is an activity for youth where we would do the Underground Railroad. At the top left, this was actually when we dedicated our marker. Okay, here is our marker. And again, you see the Osterman building to the left. So that marker is located in front of what some people have said where the front door of the Osterman building. It is now a parking lot. But this is our Juneteenth marker, and it is on the Strand. It's on 22nd and Strand. A number of things are on the Strand that you can see about Galveston history. There's also a mural on the wall that is interactive. You can use your cell phone and take a picture, and you can hear a story of that particular event. We have a middle pageant marker, and this marker, and there are several of them, I think there are about 40 of them or more throughout the United States. These markers are presented to any port in which enslaved people were transported. So it ended when the end of the international trade. These markers, these places were identified. Galveston was one of them. And it basically said it commemorates those who survived and those who perished on their way to another place that they didn't know anything about. Committee, the African American Heritage Committee, has published 2 books, and all donations support Rosewood Cemetery, cemetery founded by African Americans in 1911. The book on the left, African Americans of Galveston, is more of an image-driven book where you actually had to have an image in order to present the story. And I don't know if you can see this picture clearly, but it's something different than most pictures that were taken of groups of folks of different nationalities. This one was taken in 1937 of the postman in Galveston. The interesting thing about this one, because in doing a lot of research, when there were African Americans involved, they generally were at the back or at the top. You could barely see them. But on this picture, all the African American postmen are on front, and you can actually see them. Some of our friends and neighbors or folks that know us in Galveston have actually recognized some of them. So that was the first book. And we actually published that one in 2013. The one on the right is the most recent one, which was published and available in 2021, the same summer in May, and that the federal holiday was signed. So we were very proud of this one because it's just as it said, Lost Restaurants of Galveston African American Community. For years, that was one of the things that was noted for Galveston. African Americans had the best food and wonderful restaurants. And with dating back to the 1920s, you could find where in the directories, if there were for African Americans and their businesses and so on, there would always be a C. So we were able to find restaurants for as back as 1920. But many of them are gone. well, almost all of them are gone now. Some of them are just empty lots. Some of them have been renovated to the point that they're not recognizable. We only have 3 African-owned restaurants in Galveston at this time, but we wanted to share the stories. Originally, it was going to be a cookbook, one where we would publish recipes handed down through generations, recipes from some of those restaurants. But what happened caused us not to find it, mainly because of Hurricane Ike. Many of the people who had worked there or had family members who worked at restaurants, they no longer had the information, but we were able to find enough in various places to do it. So these are our 2 publications. And this, I am in our exhibit, and our exhibit is titled, "And Still We Rise, Galveston Juneteenth Story." It is an exhibit that covers before 1860 and goes through Reconstruction. I will mention one now. I think everybody asks, why did it take so long? We've never had anything that's basically told us a documentation why, but there were several reasons. But the only one that I think I would support is that at that time, we were still at war. The war began in 1861 and ended in 1865. And actually in Texas, there was a small war that ended in May 25th of 1865. So the reasoning is that they really they lost a number of their men. They had to just had to regroup and find enough soldiers to not just cover Galveston, but cover Texas. As you know, Texas is a large state. So to have enough to go throughout the state and issue the order other places or just enforce the order, they had to have. And we know that more than 2,000 troops did enter Galveston, and a large number of them were African soldiers. So that's one of the reasons that I believe that may have happened. People have given other reasons, like, the messenger was killed, or even the Union decided to allow the people in Texas to finish their crop. But I really think the one that I have presented is probably the real reason.